Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again. Tomorrow's Friday, Parashat Mikeytz, Shabbat Chanukah. I'd like to talk a little bit about who our forefathers married, because we know that Chanukah is a time of the war against the Hellenistic culture and trying to darken the hearts of Israel, not allowing us to study our Torah, not to maintain our purity, our identity as the people of Israel. And in order to understand this, we have to understand, in order to help us understand this, questions come to mind if we look in the different portions throughout the Torah relating to the marriage of our forefathers and the behavior of our forefathers when it comes to marriage. And right away, one of the great questions come to mind: Jacob. Jacob marries two sisters. And we know Rachel and Leah. And we know, according to the Torah, a person cannot marry two sisters. It's considered one of the sexual offenses. A person is not allowed to marry two sisters in their lifetime. If one passes away, it's something else. He can marry the others. If he's married to one sister and she passes away, he can marry later on the other sister. But a person can't marry two sisters in their lifetime together. That's something that can't be done. And the question is, how did Jacob do something like that? If he fulfilled the entire Torah before it was given, you can say, okay, that's before the Torah was given, but still, the question comes to mind. And other questions come to mind. This week's portion, if we look in Genesis chapter 41, verse number 45, we see that Joseph was given the name Tzofnat Paneach by Paro, and also given the daughter of Potiphera, Osnat, as a wife. And how could Joseph marry a daughter of an Egyptian? Right, she'll make an Egyptian woman. If we see how meticulous, again, our forefathers were to send Abraham, to send Eliezer to get a wife for Isaac, and Isaac sending Jacob to get his wives from the family as well. But how could Joseph go ahead and marry, you can say, okay, Paro forced him, whatever it was. Okay, it seems to be something that has to be, of course, clarified. And if we go on, last week's portion, for example, is another very, very good example. We learn about Judah. Judah chooses to marry the daughter of Shua. Now, who was Shua? Shua, the Torah says he was a Canaanite, right, from the land of Canaan. And right away, how did Judah marry a Canaanite woman? And of course, we know too the sons, the tragedy, that they were evil. God killed them. They died early in their lives. And there was one, of course, Shelah, the son that survived. But whatever it was, Judah himself, we see, did something that didn't make sense. Again, marrying a Canaanite woman as well. Later on, we see the Torah describes Shimon and his children. It's brought down, and we're going to be reading about it, as a matter of fact, next week's portion, where it's going to talk about that. You can check it out on in chapter 46, verse 10. It says, and the children of Shimon were Yemuel, Yamin, Ohad, Yachin, Vetzocha, and then it says Shaul ben Aknanit, Shaul, the daughter of a Canaanite, the son of a Canaanite. So the question is, we see that also Shimon married a Canaanite woman, and those are some examples. There are others. We'll stop here from when I want to try to really understand this. If we see how much Mesirut Nefesh, how much our forefathers were trying so hard to maintain that our identity, what's going on here with the children. And in order to understand this, I'm going to bring down a beautiful Nachmanides, the Ramban, who actually brings some of these questions, and he deals with it in a very interesting way. And he says, and he talks about the portion that deals with Judah marrying a daughter of a Canaanite, and then he right away says, he brings down the Targum Onkelos, which says that it really wasn't he wasn't a Canaanite person, but it was a person who's a trader, who deals with trading wares. And he brings down, Onkelos doesn't translate the word Canaanite as a Canaanite, but in Aramaic as a Tagar, or Tagar, he says. A Tagar is a Tagar, someone who's a trade. So it wasn't a Canaanite person. That's number one. And he brings down, when he talks about what Shimon did, that he married a Canaanite woman, that one of his children, Shaul, was the son of the Canaanite woman, who he said. He explains it as that was like a one yotzei dofen, a one exception to the rule that our forefathers were careful not to marry a Canaanite woman. So the Torah pointed that out, that was his mistake, that Shimon did by marrying a Canaanite woman. He also brings down what Rashi says in that a midrash that says it really wasn't that he married a Canaanite woman. It refers to Dinah. Dinah is the daughter of Jacob and Leah. And Rashi brings down that, and this is what the Rambam quotes, that Dinah was raped, as we all know, by Shechem, the son of Hamor. So she didn't want to leave the house. She felt so abused and so terribly abused by this. And therefore, she asked her brother Shimon to marry her. And Shimon marries his sister. So right away, okay, so we solved the problem that it wasn't a Canaanite girl that Shimon married, but he married his own sister. That was an incestual relationship, correct? So that's something that doesn't make sense. That's a Torah, of course, does not allow such a thing. It's considered, again, a grave sexual sin to someone to marry a sister. So therefore, right away, either way we go, we have an issue. So if he didn't marry a Canaanite woman, he married his sister. We have to understand all that. And we will, of course, try to make some sense over here. So I'd like to, with those questions in mind, I want to, as I mentioned, Nachmanides, he brings down these questions, and I'd like to first explain, read some of his words here and try to explain. So he says like this. He says, he brings down, first of all, the tractate of Psachim, that if we even understand the simple way of the Canaan, when it mentions Canaanite, these women that from Canaan that were married by the forefathers, well, he says that the Talmud in Psachim brings down that these women were not originally from Canaan. They weren't original native Canaanites, but they were really other nations that came there, like from Egypt, from Ammon, from Moab, and or from Ishmael, and therefore they really weren't Canaanites. But the Canaanites themselves, they did not marry. Our forefathers did not marry Canaanites. How would it make a difference? By marrying other women from other nations, but we're going to see there's a difference in levels of the women from different nations. And Canaan was considered a very, very poisonous, dangerous nation that our forefathers were told to totally stay away from and not to go near. And that's why it was a grave, grave sin to marry a Canaanite woman. But according to this understanding, a simple understanding, but not other women of other nations. Now, the Rambam goes on to bring down what our rabbis say in the Midrash. And he brings down two opinions. Rabbi Yehuda, what does Rabbi Yehuda say? He says that with the each one of the 12 tribes of Israel that were born, a sister was born with them. For example, let's just say Levi, right? So Levi had a sister born with him. Or Asher, Issachar, Shimon, everyone had a sister. And the sisters that were born to each one of the tribes, so there were, let's say, as we say all together, the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Jacob. So we also have 12 daughters of Jacob, right? And we know Dinah is one of them, but there were other daughters born as well. And what he says that what happened was the tribes married one sister. Each one married a sister. And again, we said before that this is against the Torah. Okay, we'll have to try to understand that. This was before the Torah was given, as we say. So they married the sisters, but don't forget there were 4 mothers involved. So it can easily be that they didn't marry the sister of the same father. Of the same mother, but they married sisters of a different mother, and they sort of switched around that way. But so still sisters are half sisters. So before the Torah is given, we can understand in a way that this practice was allowed. But again, we have to that's one opinion. Another opinion brought down, which is very interesting, is the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah. What does he say? Rabbi Nehemiah says, as opposed to the words of Rabbi Yehuda, that they married a Canaanite woman. But in reality, Canaanite woman means they were living in Canaan, but they were not from Canaan. The Ramban explains that they were people that actually came and moved over for trading purposes, like from Moab and Ammon, from the Talmud in Psachim, as we said. But they weren't really original native Canaanite women. So that's really the difference, these two different opinions of how to understand that whole thing. And the Rambam goes on to say Okay, and this is a very important point which I want to stress. He says like this: "Val derech svara einenu nachon sheisenu kulam Kanaaniyot." He says, according to a simple understanding of svara, we can't possibly fathom that they would really marry Canaanite women. Why? Because sheyeh benochalei aretz mizera Canaan ha'eved ha'arur, because Canaan was a cursed slave, as we know. When Noah curses, right? And he says the Torah itself says that they must be totally banished, and we know that what the laws related to Canaan, if they don't make peace with Israel, they will be eradicated. Canaan was a very, very entrenched in evil and uncleanliness, and that kind of people, these evil people, the Maimonides says, there's no way in the world. And that's what, of course, he's bringing down the sources, that it could be that our forefathers actually married one of the original native Canaanites, because they really came from a very bad source. And when you're building the house of Israel, it cannot be built from such a source. So that is why we see the different explanations. One was they all married, even married sisters, but not to go near Canaanites. Others were that they married other foreign women, according to the simple understanding, the Rabbi Nechemi's opinion. So that, if we understand that, of course, and which clarifies it very well, I think, we have to try to understand, and I'd like to, what's going on over here. Nevertheless, if we go to the sister thing, and we know that, and we have sources that say that our forefathers filled the entire Torah, it's still, the question's still there. Okay, they weren't Canaanite women, okay? That we see that they definitely weren't Canaanite women, according to all opinions. They were either the foreign woman or they were sisters. But we still have to clarify the issue of foreign woman, number one, and the sister issue. First, I'll begin with the foreign woman. Now, have to realize, again, don't forget, before the Torah was given, our forefathers all lived before the Torah. Now, as I mentioned before, our rabbis say they fulfilled the Torah before, but still, they weren't bound by the laws of the Torah, right? As far as, obligation, but they did it as a natural thing. And the fact that they married these women that were not from the Canaanites, so these women were good people from other nations. At the end of the day, of course, they became part of the house of Israel, and they adopted, of course, the laws of Israel and became part of the Israeli family. So we can understand that in a simple way. Nice people from other nations joining the house of Israel and then becoming part of the nation. But again, and this was allowed because it was before the Torah was given. Okay. But on the other hand, if we follow very carefully, what it says, a person cannot, even before the Torah was given, the rabbi, how forefathers maintained the Torah, even the most meticulous things like rabbinical laws, it doesn't make sense how Jacob would marry two sisters, and again, how even our forefathers would marry other women from other nations, although they were good people from other nations, but still, it's still something the Torah doesn't allow. But we can understand it. That's a simpler thing to understand because it's easily convert them. And before they married them, they converted them to their ways of one God. Monotheism at that time, obviously, was the most important thing. And again, Judaism didn't exist as the nation of Israel, so that could be a simple solution. But you have two sisters. There's nothing to convert. You can't change. You're not allowed to marry two sisters. That's a much harder question. The marriage of two sisters. If we want to ask our question about, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that they each married a twin sister, that's also the same question. Although they were a sister not from the same mother, but still, they still were sisters. And according to the Jewish law, it's against the Jewish law to marry a sister, even a half sister, right? From if you have a common parent, and therefore, how is that possible? That's a great question to Rabbi Yehuda, and of course to understand Jacob. I'm saying Rabbi Yehuda, who said he married the twin sisters, as we see in the beginning of, I should mention, in the beginning of the Torah, the first man and woman, we all know that they also had, they were twins, and that's how the world was perpetuated. That's why it says the world will be built on love and kindness. Love and kindness refers to, when it talks about the Torah, that relationship when it says you cannot have relations with your sister, it's a prohibited marriage, it says chesedu. Strange, it mentions the word love and kindness. And it hints to the fact that at the beginning of time, that's how the world perpetuated. That's how the world began in the beginning. But nevertheless, this was not allowed it's against the Torah to do such a thing. And for Noachites as well. Noachites, as we all know, have to fill the laws of sexual purity and certain sexual laws that are applied to them as well. And the law says itself that they cannot marry a sister either. Right? But the question is, if it's from the mother or father's side, there's a difference. But nevertheless, for the sons of Jacob, that's prohibited totally. And how was that allowed to be done? So that's what we have to try to understand if they're following the Torah. So for a Jew, I'm saying, right? Obviously, a person can't do something like that for sure. So anyway, those are the questions. In order to answer, there is a huge discourse, which I cannot cover all the topic in one sitting for sure, because it's very, 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 very long and in many, many directions here. And I'd like to mention just a very, very powerful teaching of the Nefesh HaChaim. Nefesh HaChaim was one of the great rabbis from Volozhin, Reb Chaim Volozhin, a student of Vilna Gaon. And he talks about, in his book, Nefesh HaChaim is a very important work of talking about study of Torah, talk about prayer, many, many topics. And this question comes up, and his answer that he brings down is that our forefathers, for sure, maintained the Torah before the Torah was given. But in certain situations, when they saw, because they were prophets, and when they saw in the Ruach HaKodesh, in their holiness, in their spiritual connection that they had, they saw in certain instances where here they saw that in order to build the house of Israel, they were to marry these particular people. So in that situation, they, even though it went against the Torah, but they saw that what we call something called a horat sha'ah, like in Judaism is a concept called horat sha'ah. Horat sha'ah means that sometimes there's a special exception to the rule. And here, I can't compare it, it wasn't like a horat sha'ah, in this situation. I can't compare it 100% to that concept, but it's similar. And the Nefesh HaChaim wants to say that Jacob saw in his high spiritual level that he was destined for these two sisters to be married to him. And therefore he married the two sisters, although, on black and white it's against the Torah law. And that's, again, was an exception. That's the explanation of the Nefesh HaChaim. So and the Maharal of Prague goes in a similar situation. And in the future, maybe we can actually try to learn in detail, to try to go through what they're saying and explain it more. But I wanted to give that one direction. There's also another direction which I want to focus on, and that's on Nachmanides, I'm sorry. Nachmanides says something very, very profound and powerful. And he says, which is a very, very beautiful explanation in my eyes and a very simple explanation, is that Jacob at that time was out of the land of Israel. And out of the land of Israel, there are a different set of rules when you're living outside the land of Israel as opposed to living inside the land of Israel. And therefore, Nachmanides says, since Jacob was outside the land of Israel, the Torah is not binding in the same way it's binding in the land of Israel. And that's what we see. We see, it is brought down by one of the commentaries, I forgot who brings it down, I think it's the Sefer Hasidim. He says that Jacob asked the two sisters, you want to go back to the land of Israel, because they knew when they go back to the land of Israel, this is not going to apply, that you can marry two sisters. So one of them, God forbid, is going to have a tragedy, in that we saw that Rachel dies when he comes back to the land. Rachel passes away. So Jacob can't be married to two sisters in the land, which opposes the Torah. And they agreed. Nevertheless, they said, we have to go. We have to build the house of Israel. They went. And then, unfortunately, Rachel dies in childbirth. And but nevertheless, that move, nevertheless, we learn from here that great difference of in the land of Israel, practicing the Torah as opposed to practicing Torah abroad. And Nachmanides brings down the Midrash, which talks about that, the reason we do Torah outside the land of Israel is so we don't forget the Torah when we enter the land. So we know it's really a powerful teaching of Nachmanides, how it relates to the Torah in the land of Israel on such a different level than we can imagine. And that has huge implications, of course. Of course, it doesn't mean any practicing Jew today, of course, is 100%. Don't forget, Jacob was still before he was Jewish, right? And therefore, there was difference still, it made a difference outside the land of Israel for him as opposed to inside the land of Israel. Today, of course, for a Jew, there's also differences being outside and inside the land. It's another level. But nevertheless, a person saying, okay, I'm Jewish, but I'm living outside of Israel, then I can, God forbid, not fulfill the Sabbath, not fulfill the laws. No. Every Jew has to fulfill the laws of the Torah. But Nachmani is saying on a spiritual level, there's a huge difference. And therefore, that's why Jacob allowed himself to marry 2 wives when he was outside, as opposed to being in the land of Israel itself. That was a very, very powerful explanation of Nachmanides. There are other beautiful explanations here, but I wanted to bring down, and it's important to understand, and of course, regarding the tribes marrying the sisters, we have to basically say, here's one way we spoke, they were, of course, Canaanite women, so that wouldn't be a problem at all, of course. And if they were marrying a sister, they were living in the land of Israel. For sure, that wouldn't be allowed, and as far as the Torah. So there we have no choice but to say, or in the spiritual level, so this was what it was supposed to be, and there's no way around it, and whatever it is. But it's sort of, in a way, it could be a question to Nachmanides' answer. Anyway, if we sum things up after we see these 2 beautiful explanations of Nachmanides and explanation of the Nefesh HaChaim, we see 2 important concepts that come together for the story of Chanukah. Chanukah, as we said, is the festival of light, our war against Hellenism, of intermarriage, against those who come against the Torah, values the Torah, which stresses so much Jewish identity and how we have to maintain our identity. And of course, this whole, what's going on in the world today, and in Israel, and the elections and all this is really about Jewish identity, which is, I said, intrinsically connected to our country and having a Jewish homeland. It all comes together. And therefore, what we understand from Nachmanides, the Ramban, how the Torah, when it applies to the land of Israel, is such a much higher level than we can even fathom, and the Torah outside the land. And the story of Chanukah was that struggle within the land to destroy the level of Torah within the land of Israel, because the war against our temple, when they came into they defiled the oil, they defiled our Beit HaMikdash, and tried to prevent us from maintaining our divine service in the land. It was a war against Israel's independence in the land of Israel, of maintaining our identity. And this is exactly what our forefathers struggled so hard to maintain that Jewish identity, to build our Jewish identity, build the identity of Israel. And therefore, as we are here celebrating the holiday of Chanukah, we can just say one simple thing: we have survived. Israel is an everlasting nation, as we see from so many generations of attempts to eradicate us, to destroy our identity, and to eliminate the people of Israel. We saw the peak of Nazi Germany. Although in every generation, people come to rise again, to come and try to damage Israel and destroy Israel, but there's no greater destruction to try to destroy us within our families, within our identity. And literally, that is, to this very day, we see the progressive liberal concept of looking at Judaism, looking at Torah, anything that talks about God and spirituality and that kind of level, it becomes an outcast, it becomes some kind of foreign radical craziness in their eyes of what they believe in. And that's the story of Chanukah. It's to this very day chasing us. And the rise in anti-Semitism in the world, people can't express their identity. I saw they had some kind of, a report this week on the news, and they spoke about how in the campuses in the United States, a tremendous rise of anti-Semitism. One girl put on a mezuzah on her dormitory door, and literally was attacked, and she was embarrassed, so afraid that she had to remove a mezuzah off the doorpost. Just trying to fight against our identity. It's the same enemy of Israel. Those forces that come against us from the time of, from Antiochus, the Epiphanes, the madman who tried to, wipe out any Jewish identity. Anyway, this is a broad topic, but a very important one. So have a beautiful Shabbat and a Chanukah Sameach.